So we're talking a little bit about kink today. Could you define that for me, Kiki?
Sure. Strictly speaking, it's really anything outside of your traditional heteronormative sex. So, I mean, it can be as quote unquote mundane as, dirty talk or a different position. It's really anything outside of, a pretty small circle.
So you're talking about a spectrum of behavior then?
Mm-hmm.
Where on one side you might have something, a couple that decides to talk dirty to each other, which for some people might be over the top, and for other people that's really vanilla, you say?
Yeah, vanilla is definitely the more, the calmer side of the spectrum, if you wanted to say.
Okay. And so tell me about the kink culture. Like, it's a pretty active culture.
Definitely. There's a lot that happens, especially, in bigger cities, obviously. You're talking about a smaller portion of the population, and so big cities are going to have a community, generally, of people who come together who kind of want to experience the same thing and want to explore the same areas of kink with each other. Mm-hmm. And so it's a fairly active community. There's the internet, there's parties, there's conferences that happen, just to bring people together to explore those areas.
And how do you identify in this culture?
I identify as a queer switch. So queer meaning that my partners really run the gamut as far as gender, all the way from very feminine, cisgendered women, all the way to very masculine, cis-identified men, and really everything in between. And when I say I'm a switch, it means that I explore a lot of different areas. That can mean in the more power dynamics, I like to be more dominant as well as more submissive. But that's kind of psychologically speaking. Physically speaking, it means I like to receive sensation as well as give sensation.
Okay. How did you get interested in this at the beginning? I mean, can you go back to being a kid and when you first started exploring your sexuality?
Sure. And I think it even goes to before I started really knowingly exploring sexuality. I think it stems from trying to explore sensation and different experiences and maybe even different games that you would play. I think the first memory that I look back and now I realize that this has been brewing for a very long time was I was probably maybe 5 or 6, and I would take the bucket from my parents' ice maker in the freezer, and I would take the ice and I would dump the entire bucket into like a scalding hot bath. And I would lay in the bath on the ice so you can feel that cold, but you would lay in the bath so the rest of your body was just scalding from the water. And I would feel it melt, and I would feel that sensation. I would feel the water kind of dissolve into each other. And I think that was the first time that I ever can look back and think about that experience as maybe a little bit of sensation play. And obviously that evolved a lot through the years. Later on, it was picking up the story of O and the Sleeping Beauty series when I was probably 12, 13, 14. And then I really got involved in the community in a really committed way when I moved to New York a couple of years ago. And so since then, I've been able to explore it much more fully.
Can you give me an idea of what it means, sensation play? What kinds of activities are involved in that?
Sure. Sensation play is really general. It can mean a lot of different things. It's kind of, we do sensation play all the time, whether we think about it or not. If you go into a store and you see feathers and you start playing with the feathers, that is a form of sensation play. And so incorporating that into a sexual experience can be a really interesting way to play with all of the other things that you're feeling and to incorporate those different sensations into your normal sexual play, and especially incorporating different feelings. So going from hot wax to ice can really heighten the sensations that you're feeling already and really put your nerves on edge.
Which can be arousing.
Yes.
Okay. And so give me an example of like people who might engage in a sexual activity. How would hot wax even be used?
So one thing that can be really amazing is, being blindfolded and having someone pour hot wax on you, not knowing where that sensation is about to come from. Every single nerve on your body is really at its heightened state, and you're just waiting. That anticipation can be unbelievable as far as really raising the level of arousal. And so just incorporating it in little ways, all the way to, I've seen scenes where someone is laying there and all of a sudden there is a ladle full of hot wax poured on their back, all the way to, just a candle, a tapered candle being used in very, very delicate ways.
Now, I know you had told me that wouldn't be the same as being in a bar and a candle tipping over on you and a person getting aroused by that. How is that different?
I think it's the anticipation. All of a sudden, when you know you're in a sexual space, you feel that arousal and you're in that headspace. You're very much committed to the scene, and that's what you're thinking about. And the anticipation, knowing that something's coming, not knowing where, not knowing when, not knowing exactly what's going to happen, can really heighten your state.
Okay. You just mentioned the word scene. Can you define that for me?
A scene is really any kind of experience with a beginning and an ending. It can be hours and hours and hours of play and torture and sex, but it can also be a very small, very encapsulated experience that can just be exploring, let's say, a power dynamic between two people. Someone comes over, kneels down, and hands you a cup of tea. You take the tea, you say thank you, you dismiss them. All of a sudden, you've done a very small, very personal scene, but you've still done a scene. It's some kind of display of that activity.
Okay. Can you give me an idea of a scene that you've done or how that would work? You say all day, so a scene can be anything from a few minutes to a whole day?
Sure, as long as you're really kind of committed to that space. That's how I think of a scene. If I'm in that headspace, if I'm really committed to what's happening, that's what I consider a scene. So one scene that was very interesting was probably over the course of maybe 3 to 4 hours. It was a very intense scene. And it was a role play gang rape where there were 4 men and me and another submissive friend of mine. And she and I were the bottoms, blindfolded, tied up for a period. There was a lot of physical sensation play, whether it be slapping. There was a lot of sexual play. And then there was also a lot of degradation, a lot of humiliation. It was a very, very intense couple of hours that ended with me being thrown in a bathtub and drowned, not to the point of passing out, but just held underwater.
What were your emotions? What were you feeling during that scene? I would imagine that's pretty scary.
Sure. I think fear is a really intense part of it. I felt the gamut of emotions. I felt shame and humiliation, but at the same time, there's the physical sensations that are just bringing me back to the moment. There was anticipation. There was definitely nervousness and anxiety, but there was also incredible elation. This is a really interesting, fascinating thing to go through, and at the end of it, coming out and knowing that everything is fine, knowing that the whole time you're safe, and knowing the entire time that you're around people who genuinely love you can feel really unbelievable and really compassionate at the same time.